Hello and welcome to episode 41 of Subplot, of course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction work at the beginning of every month. I'm Stavros, project manager and a fan of all Star Trek series, even the ones you hate. And with me is math teacher and nostalgia gamer Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
Hi, Charlie.
As well as epidemiologist and part-time fisherman Vincent. Say hi, Vincent.
Me. That's me.
Hello.
Present.
And with us today is John Cadman, who, on top of being a Star Wars appreciator, is a bona fide aerospace engineer. Considering there's quite a lot of futuristic space travel shenanigans in this novel we're going to be talking about today, it should be fun to have John. John along with us. Say hello, John.
Hello. Let's go on the ride, man.
Let's do it. And of course, this novel is Leviathan Wakes. The first book of the Expanse trilogy, or no, way more books than trilogy. I think there's like 7 or something by now. Written by James S.A. Corey and published in 2011. So the plot of this book follows 2 main characters, James Holden, an earther and exo of an ice hauler ship, and Joe Miller, a detective on Ceres Station in the Belt. Their stories end up converging as they uncover the plot. Holden's ice hauler, the Canterbury, is lured into a trap, investigating a distress signal from the Belter ship, the Scopuli. This trap results in the Canterbury being destroyed by mysterious assailants that Holden suspects are Martian. Political tensions between Mars and the Belt rise because of this, and Mars dispatches their flagship, the Donager, to pick up Holden and the other survivors. Shortly after they are picked up, however, the Donager is blasted by the mysterious ships that destroyed the Cant. Holden and his crew barely make their escape on a Martian torpedo frigate that was docked with the Donager. And they renamed that frigate the Rocinante. With no one else left to turn to, they look for help with the Belt's OPA, Outer Planets Alliance, I believe that is, a quasi-government faction that is at odds with Earth and Mars. Meanwhile, Miller is a detective working on Ceres Station in the Belt. He takes a side job of finding a girl named Julie Mao and shipping her back to her parents on Luna. He discovers that Julie was a member of the OPA, and she was on the Scopuli bait ship, and therefore connected somehow to Holden, which, of course, they end up hearing all about how Holden was involved with the Scopuli. He becomes obsessed with her, eventually getting fired from his job so he can go track her down. The 2 protagonists meet on Eros Station by chance. They end up linking up and find Julie Mao's dead body, dead from some strange extrasolar pathogen. They discover that the whole station is an incubator for this strange substance, which has been artificially orchestrated by a lunar corporation called Protogen to see what would happen when it collected enough biomass. Miller and Holden and his crew barely escape from Eros Station. With everyone on Eros dead, Miller, Holden, and the OPA come up with a plan. They steal a huge ship that is under construction, under the OPA's jurisdiction, basically, and ram it into Eros so it will get pushed into the sun. But unfortunately, the station exhibits signs of intelligence and somehow moves itself so the ship misses and starts heading towards Earth so it can eat more delicious human biomass. Miller boards the station, lugging a nuke around, and eventually finds Julie more or less alive. She's kind of been animated by the protomolecule. He ends up convincing her to have the station miss Earth and instead crash into the planet Venus. Much better than Earth. The novel ends with tensions amongst the OPA, Earth, and Mars diffused for now, but strange structures being constructed on Venus's surface. It's a lot of stuff to cram into a small synopsis. That's 600 pages worth of book there. So let's jump right into some discussion topics. And John, I'm glad you're with us because, this book is basically set as a near future sci-fi setting, essentially. And what the one main thing that makes this book work narratively is this, hand wavy, propulsion system called the Epstein drive. What do you think about this and how it's portrayed in the novel?
Well, the Epstein drive is just like a magic box, essentially, to some extent. I mean, what they're talking about is like so they're it's all around essentially like one or two, very short, very very small amounts of acceleration, like 1g or whatnot, because he's craftily using this propulsion technology to provide them like an Earth-like atmosphere, essentially, like an artificial gravity. Like all the ships are basically like large, tall buildings, and you sort of stand in the direction in the opposite direction with which like thrust is accelerating you, which is like pretty common in a lot of theories about how we might get to other places. It's pretty efficient to travel at like constant acceleration. The problem is, the only small problem is that you need a power source, and you need a method of providing thrust that is exceedingly efficient. And that's why, the Epstein drive is just sort of magic, because such a thing does not exist.
Isn't it also like a slow boat to China?
Feasible.
Like it just takes forever because you go so slow.
Well, no, actually, 1G is really fast. Like if you could provide 1G of acceleration for half the voyage to anywhere, let's say you were going to, like in this novel, everyone's sort of traveling, bouncing in and out of the solar system, right? So if you wanted to go to the farthest edge of the solar system, let's say you're going to like Neptune or Pluto or something, a constant acceleration, we're talking about like a travel time of days, essentially, if you could do a 1G acceleration out there.
So do you also need a 1G deceleration by the time you reach your destination, or because at that point, I imagine that you're going faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, and then you also need to slow down, otherwise you're a bullet, right?
Right. Presumably, you would accelerate for half the trip, and then you would decelerate for half the trip.
Well, also, wouldn't you like lose gravitational energy as you head out there, and would have to match its orbital velocity as well, so you could, more stuff.
Right. You're not trying to like end up at like zero velocity at the end of it. You're trying to match whatever the velocity of the object you're trying to catch. That's also true. So you may not necessarily need. It's not entirely true. You may not need to slow down for half the trip. Maybe some fraction of it, depending on where you're going. But so when you're going from point to point, you could do that.
So a lot of this book, they're talking about being accelerated to like many, many Gs. I think I can't remember the exact number, but definitely like 7 or 8 Gs. And they kind of have this magical, like, crap they inject into you to make your body, be able to support that many Gs. So to you is, the juice. Sounds tasty. But it doesn't.
So good for you.
Is it only 7 or 8 Gs? He
said up to 10.
It was more, right? It was, yeah.
Like, they went past 10. They said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna die, but at least the ship will keep working." Right at the very final scene where they're chasing the Eros asteroid full of protomolecule. But like, "Oh yeah, the ship will go, but we'll be dead."
They're doing prolonged 6, and they're just like they're gonna have very long-term damage from even doing that, and even while juiced up and all that.
So does this seem like complete fairy tale science to you then, John? Like going that level of acceleration, even with this mysterious serum that keeps your body from crushing itself?
Well, I think the idea there is that you're trying to stay, like they stay conscious during this period. I think if you were to, I did not research this in advance, but I think that we all could probably sustain. NASA has done experiments on accelerations events on human beings and what's tolerable for both like Air Force purposes, but also for like space flight purposes. And then you could make the argument that I think that most humans could probably survive for very short. It's a time versus acceleration problem. So how long do you need to be functioning and well? If your acceleration event's very short, you could probably sustain very high Gs. If it's a sustained high G for quite some time, then maybe this technology of additional drugs or whatnot. But I'm not really sure what it would accomplish, other than the fact that like most of your dysfunction occurs from high Gs is probably resulting from like blood not being able to properly circulate through your body and specifically to your brain. So
good point.
Like Air Force pilots, for instance, they wear special suits which essentially constrict their extremities, especially their lower extremities, like literally squeezing the blood back to their heart and back to their brains, up to their heads, because that's the problem, is that they pass out from high.
I was going to say, is it like the fancier version of those sports sleeves things or whatever?
Exactly.
So just for reference, I looked it up. The space shuttle maximum G-force during launch apparently is about 3 Gs. So when you go 10 Gs, you're going 3 times faster than it takes to launch from Earth. So that's a lot of Gs, I imagine. High G roller coasters, like the fastest roller coasters that sling you around, are anywhere between 3.5 and 6 G.
Okay. Crazy. Okay. I mean, it's
and
go ahead, Charlie.
Go faster, we mean accelerate harder, because high school physics terms. Students. Oh yeah, and the other thing, John, isn't the main issue with like space travel is essentially the only technology we have for traveling through space is poop something out the back super hard so that you go forward.
Well, I think that he doesn't really go into this either, but yeah, kind of. I mean, there's an explanation that I don't think he goes into details about how the Epstein drive works. I think we can assume that it's some type of momentum drive, which is what you're describing, right? If you're in space, you don't have anything to push off of. So we essentially use the conservation of momentum to say, if I throw something out the back of the ship with a certain amount of momentum, then I'm going to be propelled forward with the equal and opposite amount of momentum on my ship in the opposite direction, essentially. And that's how we move about in space when there's nothing to really push off of. But you physically have to carry mass with you. This was sort of my problem with the Epstein drive, and that's the reason why it's kind of magic. This is he's writing this book, and he's like, okay, how do we enable not interstellar travel within the solar system travel, which is hard enough. How do I enable that? Well, what would you need? You would need the same thing that we need right now, which is we need to have a very high propulsive efficiency. You have to have a big power source that's very efficient at throwing very small things with a lot of acceleration out the back. But even then, you need enormous amounts of power, and you need something in a drive that's exceedingly efficient. You'd have to approach something like, for instance, let's say a dream technology that we could think of. Right now, we use like chemical propulsion, which is exceedingly inefficient, like not very efficient. It provides like a lot of thrust, but very poor fuel efficiency, if I can make an analogy. So then, maybe nuclear propulsion, we could use like fission propulsion or something of that nature. We're talking about many, many tenths of a percent of efficiency, of propulsive efficiency you can get from a fission type system. Maybe fusion. Fusion itself probably gives less than a percent of efficiency. The type of efficiencies that would be required in order to make very small vessels, which is sort of the other thing, which is what the vessel size matters here, because you have to physically have room for the fuel along the ride. Unless you're picking up fuel along the way, you have to bring all of your fuel with you if you want to travel around someplace. So to move like a 40-ton mass, you got to have millions of pounds.
I think Elon Musk put a supercharger on Mars and on Neptune already. You just drive your Tesla up and gas it.
Makes sense.
I mean, maybe there's surely they can fuel the ships up at certain locations, but
yeah.
Like a ship like the size of what they describe, like the little missile boat that they're driving around in, it has an Epstein drive, and it's like moving around about the solar system. I question
how much fuel it could actually carry.
Right. Like I didn't do the calculation.
The coffee maker that they have and stuff like that. It's like, such a spacious place with nice showers. No room for fuel.
Nope.
Where's all the fuel?
They hand wave a lot of the reactor. Like the ships have reactors, obviously, and then they have something called fuel pellets.
Yes,
which makes me seem like very small.
Missiles have enough pellets to go around the solar system 3 or 4 times. Apparently, is what they said in the very final action sequence of the book. Our nuclear missiles have enough pellets to drive around the solar system like 5 times.
So obviously, there's some kind of magic-y, hand-wavy something happening there, because these tiny little pellets are. I mean, who knows what the rate is of consumption or anything like that. But I mean, John, you're saying that like the fuel required for the G's, the acceleration they're talking about here in today's terms would be immense. So there's some kind of magic required by the Epstein drive, right?
Magic might be going so far, but like, because somebody listening to this, if we actually do have somebody listening to this, they'll note that like matter antimatter drives, for instance, are another way you could do this. But we don't have a way to store or so a matter antimatter collision. So a particle and an antiparticle colliding would provide 100% efficiency, at least in terms of producing of energy, the production of energy, as opposed to like fusion, which will provide less than 1% of.
So antimatter matter would create no heat, all energy. Like
it'll provide 100% efficiency into energy from matter into energy.
it would do the E equals MC squared part of your fuel becomes pure energy in terms of whatever, but you have to also control it for it actually giving you momentum and not just heating up or blowing up your ship.
Right, you have to direct that energy into momentum in exactly the direction that you want to go. Somehow, if you were able to get that into very high efficiency levels,
like an engine that's running off of that highly efficient fuel has to be really good as well.
Right, but the whole system, like of accelerating, you're creating some energy, like photons, for instance, maybe from this. You have to direct those photons not just in any direction, right? Because if you have like a blast, if you have an antimatter collision, insert physicist here. If that were to occur, my guess is that you would get some type of an energy release, which is in all directions, is my guess, non-focused, unless there was some other means to focus that energy, and that would provide very low efficiency because only a small portion of that could be actually captured by you in a momentum transfer in a finite-sized vehicle.
That sounds very efficient at killing you, though. Like it sounds like an explosion.
Well, welcome to why rockets are hard to make, Vincent.
It's fictional in the sense that we know of matter and antimatter, but we do not have a way of storing or collecting large amounts of them. And even if you did, you have no way of actually converting that into a high efficiency propulsion system. That's what would be required in order to enable like these very small ships to move at 1g acceleration almost continuously with very little fuel on board. That's what would be required. Yeah,
crazy efficiency that doesn't seem to exist at this technological level is what you're saying, basically.
It's an engineer's dream. Maybe in the time of the Expanse that's possible, but man, he doesn't explain it.
I think rocket science as our conversation has explained is more of an engineering problem than a like theoretical physics is it possible problem.
I would go further to say actually the reason why this gave me a little bit of heartburn was actually not because not because the author sort of like plopped a magic box and said, hey, all these things that we thought, we wish we could do with 100% efficiency, let's say we could do those. And here's the result is that we're banging around the solar system very quickly, et cetera, et cetera. If you truly had that technology, I think you would see more, you'd see the ability to move out into beyond the solar system, into more intergalactic travel. And they reference the fact that there's like these intergenerational ships that they're building for like the Mormons essentially to go out.
Right.
But I feel like that would be the type of technology they're describing. That would not be a concern. Like going out into the galaxy would not be a concern.
I think the Mormons went from door to door and got enough money to make that ship.
I think the point was that like it's just enough technology to have us efficiently get around the solar system, but like distance between stars is like exponentially more. So there's going to be some future period in which like we're traveling around here pretty nicely, but the stars are still like pretty far off.
Far away. Yeah, I mean, this seems very. I mean, the tech itself, seems very narratively driven. It's just enough so you can make dramas that are exciting around the solar system, but not make it so grandiose.
Yeah, I think the more so issue is if something's that fundamentally like changing in our understanding of physics, then you could probably also apply it to a whole bunch of other stuff, and like more general science understanding stuff changes completely, and you'd see a bigger shift in society and how it lives and all that. But
sure. All right. Well, John, do you have any other feedback on the drive specifically before we move on to other questionable science in this novel?
No, I'd like one, please. Well,
let's talk about the stations then. So we've got Ceres and Eros, which I think are literally made in spitting asteroids, and then to a lesser extent Tycho, which I think is just a man-made station of some kind. And they talk a lot about the gravity present, and I'm sure Charlie, you can weigh in on this too from a physics perspective. But they're major hubs. You've got millions of people living there, with I think gravity generated by the Coriolis Effect, supposedly. So what do you guys think about how this effect is portrayed? Like, is this practical, what we're seeing?
I think we have to make a slight correction. So
yes.
Artificial gravity, or the it's not by the Coriolis effect.
Okay.
by centripetal force.
Yeah. So,
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
When he brings up the Coriolis effect, it's like the idea that it like messes up how you were being pulled towards the center or pulled towards the floor, right?
Right.
So, but we'll get into. I have more to say about that. So, but it's like it. Yeah, but John's right. It's the centripetal force, or it's like when you go in those gravitrons or a merry-go-round, you feel yourself get pushed against the wall because you're spinning, right?
Right.
Like that's the force.
Centripetal force.
That's the wall pushing you into a circle, because if the wall wasn't there, you would just go flying in a straight line.
So the idea that the further you are away from the center, the greater the force is, because you're like moving that much faster.
Okay.
Right.
I go over this so many times with my students.
It doesn't matter how far away you are.
A is v squared over r. It's the velocity squared over the radius. So if you're further away, you don't have to.
Yes. If you're further away,
it's so dramatic. It's a dramatic pause.
If you're further away, it's inversely related, right? So you have to spin faster the further away you are.
Correct. Right.
Like
so does that mean if you're like a mile away from the center and it's spinning at and the arms are fixed and you're spinning, does that mean you feel more centripetal force when you're like a mile away compared to if you were like 5 feet away from the center? Or is it inverse?
I think if you're in a car driving 10 miles per hour, do you get thrown to the side more if you're spinning in tight circles or very large circles? Like the tighter your turn, the harder you get thrown, right?
Okay.
So you had to actually be moving faster, faster squared, if you want to make up for the fact that you're further away. So the bigger your space station is, or your asteroid or whatever, the faster
I get it.
I think it's your question is like if you've got like a ball at the end of a string and you're rotating it around you. If you're at the end of the ball, you feel more acceleration than you do if you're further up the string towards your hand.
Yes, exactly. That's my point. The station is not like flexing like a bendy gumbo, like Gumby guy, right? It's fixed. It's a solid object, right? So as it spins, whatever, like the guys who are standing in the center, who are like closer to the hand of the yo-yo, like feel less force than the guys who are on the yo-yo side of things, because they're on the outside of the station and it's spinning like fucking fast out there, right?
Yeah. So if you have a solid object, it's omega squared r, which is how fast you're rotating in terms of angles, not like your velocity.
So it feels like the asteroid spinning, generating gravity would generate different amounts of gravity depending on where you are on the station. That's what my question was. Is that the Coriolis effect? Like where they're standing really, really high. They said, "Oh, I'm really high, and this gravity is all weird." And that was my question. Is that the
Coriolis effect? Is like how the Earth spins, right? Like it spins on one axis, but so you spin on a little latitude line, which goes in a little circle. Like the closer, it's a smaller circle, the closer you get to the North Pole, right?
Sure.
But if you have something in space, it will always do large circles around the Earth. Like it won't follow those tiny circles with the Earth's rotation. It will always go around the center of the Earth. It doesn't go around the axis if you have something in space, right?
Okay.
So that's why when you see satellite patterns, they're always like waves going north and south, because that's how they travel. They're not going in the same circles as the circles with the Earth's rotation.
Right.
So the Coriolis effect is you were hanging out on the Earth and you fire a cannonball. Since you were moving on the Earth, it actually pulls you along in a direction you otherwise wouldn't go. And so according to you, you see like the cannonball spin off to the side, because it's traveling like the big circle around the center of the Earth, not along the axis with you connected to the ground. I would draw pictures, but this is an audio podcast. So.
You know what? If you draw a picture, I'll be sure to include it on the YouTube version.
Okay, but the reason I was wondering...
The cannonball is no longer being accelerated by the planet underneath you.
Because...
So it kind of looks like it's... If you were to... This example is a little bit harder to do on Earth because people have a concept that if they throw like a ball through the air, that they don't see the ball sort of like wing it to the left or the right because of the Coriolis effect.
Well,
that's for other reasons.
There's a reason we didn't discover this until we had like ships with super high-powered cannons firing at each other from super far away. Because if you just did like normal physics, you'd be way off. You had to actually start accounting for the Coriolis effect.
Is it kind of this relative like speed thing where like two cars are passing each other and like Like because you're moving at different speeds, like weird things happen. Like, or
I
if you're
think
driving
like
under
the ground is moving underneath you.
The
ground is
I
moving,
guess,
but the cannonball is not.
I guess the basic idea is that, if you're in a car that's driving in circles, right, and you throw a ball straight up, like, the car's pulling you into a circle, but what you see is the ball get flung to the side. It's a more complicated version of that.
So, like, when you're in a car, you're driving at 60 miles an hour, you spit out the window, the spit goes backwards really fast. It's not like you spit backwards. It's more that it's not traveling at the same speed as you anymore.
I mean, it's if you're in the car turning the car, like, you're not moving in a straight line, right? Yeah. And so it's more complicated because there's, like, the gravity of the Earth versus how the Earth's ground is pulling you along with it, right?
I think you guys are talking about the same thing. Like if you're doing donuts and you throw a ball out the window and you throw it straight ahead along with the car, but you keep turning, the ball is not going to keep following you with the car doing donuts. It's going to go in a straight line because every impulse that you've given to that ball is already it's now traveling in a trajectory along a velocity vector.
Sure.
The reason I'm having this discussion is because he keeps talking about the Coriolis Effect in a spinning asteroid, which isn't working due to gravity. It's working due to the fact that it's spinning and pushing you against the walls. So why is there a Coriolis Effect? Like, if it's due to the gravity of the asteroid itself, like, why didn't you slightly tilt the floors? I mean, I guess that would still result in... I mean, it's not the same effect. I feel like it would have a different name because it's like, quote, your gravity is in a completely different and weird direction. It's towards the center axis of the rotation. It's not like towards the center of the planet.
So I got it differently. I'm kind of with you. I think we're talking about the same thing. I think that he's using a word that is not applicable, but is translatable to the audience.
Like I feel like the idea that you are mixing forces and spinning effects in ways that don't make sense if you get them to kind of actually mix with each other. I can understand why you would use the same term, even if it's not actually the same effect. It just felt weird.
Let me go back to what Vincent was bringing up at the very beginning of this conversation. I think this is what he's describing. You guys can tell me if you think that this is what he's describing. The space station has a certain amount of... You were mentioning that depending on where you are along that... From the center of rotation, from the center line of the rotation, the axis, all the way out to like the ball at the end. You're on the space station. If you're on the outermost ring, you feel a certain amount of acceleration because you're out there. And as you travel closer and closer to the center of the ring, you get less acceleration because you're moving closer and closer on this like fixed rotating fixed object. If the smaller that is, the more that you might be able to tell the difference between the acceleration at the bottom and the top. Like physically, you're not, when you get to the center, you're no longer, you feel no acceleration, right? You feel no gravity. Yeah, exactly.
You're 0 G's, right?
And when you're at the very end of the string, when you're at the very end of that radius, let's say, of rotation, you're feeling 100% of that gravity. So as you move up that string towards the center line, you are the reason you are feeling less acceleration, centripetal acceleration, is because you're physically not moving as fast. Like your velocity is lower, even if your rotation rate is the same, because you're physically on that like fixed object, but you're not traveling as fast. So think about that for a second. You were traveling a certain speed at the end of the string. And by the time you get to the center, you're not traveling at all, zero velocity. So how'd you get there? And the answer is you decelerated. You have to decelerate. That's how it works. To go from one velocity to the other, you have to go through an acceleration. So you're physically slowing down as you travel from the end of the string to the center of the string. So as like if you were on a ladder and you were climbing that ladder from the bottom of the string to the center of the rotation, you would physically feel a deceleration, and it would feel, not only are you feeling less gravity down up, holding you back down the ladder, you'd actually feel an acceleration to the left or right, trying to push you off the ladder because you're decelerating as you're getting closer and closer.
Yeah,
I think that's what they're talking about. I think that's the disorientation he's discussing.
I think I get what they're going for, because like I guess if you're right near the axis of rotation, but also on the outer end of the shell, you're getting all the gravity of the asteroid but less of the rotational fake gravity, which will start like I was saying, will mess with each other, kind of like how Coriolis Effect works on Earth. I guess I see it's like the right term. It just felt weird because I was wondering, like, why don't you just make your little inner thing a bunch of cylinders instead of actually curving anything? But I guess gotta put the poor worker people someplace.
What I want to know is why did they put so much effort into the design of their space stations as they did into their Epstein drive? Like, where's the magical technology that like fixed it?
Yeah,
you know,
well, that's what I was just saying before. If we have Epstein drives, we probably also have other really cool stuff as well. Like, you know, they're talking about how hard it was to rotate all this stuff. It's like, once you have Epstein drives, just attach ones going opposite directions on both sides, and then voila, you can spin things up real easy.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the weird things about this setting is that there's certain things that are like magic hand wavy stuff, like these Epstein drives, but then there's other stuff which is not as advanced, like these aging. It sounds like the tech advanced just enough for them to be able to like haul ice from the belt, and then that's it.
Stuff where it's like, well, Earth has like an old but massive fleet, but then they also have their weird like paramilitary like super sci-fi ships from the corporations on Earth at the same time. What?
That is a question mark. But I mean, just before we get off the topic of tech, I mean, John, not only do we have these, these things happening with the everything we're just discussing with the Coriolis Effect and centrifugal force for all the stations, but we've also got all the ship-to-ship weapons. I assume like the torpedoes have tiny little Epstein drives attached to them or some shit like that because they use fuel pellets. But they also have the Gauss cannons and point defense cannons, the PDCs. Do you have any reactions to any of that? Does it just seem like, close enough to modern tech and that they've just stuck these futuristic magic drives on them?
I mean, for the most part, to be honest, as a oh gosh, I'm invalidating why you even like had me here as a sort of like an expert maybe opinion to bounce off of, but like there's. You actually put it pretty well at the beginning of this discussion, where there's just enough tech in here to sort of to make a setting for the book, a setting for the drama.
Sure.
And maybe that's all sci-fi books, although I kind of disagree. But I think that this book is sci-fi second, drama first. It's because
sure.
they did not really go into tremendous details about these things. Like, for instance, like the torpedo tech and the Gauss guns are really just extensions of technologies that we already have or working on, like weapon technologies that we already have. Like, I took a regular torpedo. That's what we would use, like some type of like missile technology. And it's way better because we have a better drive on it. So it's got super range and it's really, like rail guns, for instance. Maybe rail guns are a possibility on future weapon systems, like in our current day. Like that might be possible in the short to medium term, but they've perfected them on a massive scale for these like battleships in space. Actually, to be honest, it doesn't seem very advanced in general. A lot of the tech doesn't actually seem that advanced, with the exception of the Epstein drive, which also is just the least explained portion.
Right.
So maybe that's by design. Is really it's not meant to feel. Perhaps what the authors are going for is to not make you feel so uncomfortable by the tech, such that it dominates your. If there's such weird technology that's available in this universe that you can't really relate to it, then that maybe dominates your attention in the book. And I don't think that's where they want the attention to be.
Right. It's not on the, the crazy tech. It's more like the, mystery and intrigue and stuff. It seems like, at least it's just not enough of a focus.
I think so.
Yeah. Sounds reasonable. But I know, Vincent, you were talking to me about this earlier, about how this near future sci-fi setting kind of affected your believability, because you're saying in the future, in like the far future, like Star Trek times, you can hand wave freaking everything, but here you just got to hand wave, only the few magic things that make things work.
You can tell by the discussion that we're having that we're getting stuck on a lot of the details. And so in the very end of the copy of the book I have, there's an actually an interview with one of the two authors of the book. So I don't know if you mentioned Stavros, but like this book is written by two authors, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And one of them was actually like the assistant to George R.R. Martin, who writes the Game of Thrones series. And so I think the interview is with that author, but essentially the author was just saying, you know what, there's a hole in terms of sci-fi literature, and that most sci-fi literature takes place in the very, very far future, where essentially all tech is kind of like so futuristic that's essentially magical, right? So you think your Star Wars, where like, you have a lightsaber, right? Nobody thinks about like how a lightsaber would actually be built. It just happens to work, right? Or like Death Star, planet busting laser, like it works, right? Lasers work in space. Even explosions, fire in space, fire works, even though there's no oxygen, whatever.
Sound in space, yes.
Right. And then there's also like sci-fi in the present, right? Where it's like, oh, let's do just sci-fi books, imagining that it's on Earth now or in like some city that we live in. But the near future sci-fi is what they said was like a gap. And that's a gap they were trying to go to, which is like, a step into the future where we can theoretically go into our solar system, maybe not other systems, which is kind of, they have one ship that can go to another system in this book, but essentially something in between. And I guess my question was that to the group is like whether or not this is a pro or a con, because it's so closely related to the present, like we were just saying, like the tech about like, these impulse drives, all these things, like we are picking holes in just about every single aspect of the science, like the Coriolis effect, like, gravity, like we haven't even gotten to like the biological aspects, which I also like have lots of things to kind of nitpick essentially. But like this kind of near future thing where it's like everyone understands the present, and to then say like, oh, this is the way we're going to look like in maybe 100 or 1,000 years or something like that. I think a lot of us would be like, there's no way in 1,000 years our like, our solar system would look like that, because there's so many other things going on. Right. But I mean, it definitely lends an idea of like discussion. It's very provocative. So I guess my question is like, how do you guys feel about this near future setting?
The one thing I really liked about it is it allowed the author to kind of set up the setting where it's not like we're in conflict with aliens, or it's so far in the future that it might just. Well, I mean, I'm talking about the setting, right? Because that's one of my other comments is about how does the setting change with that. But like it's so we're not so far in the future that it isn't like galactic politics and post-human history type stuff like Star Trek, or something that essentially has turned into a medieval fantasy thing like Dune or Star Wars. Like it felt very interesting to be like with the issues with having to travel the solar system, you end up with kind of this colonial relationship between the belt and the inner planets, almost kind of historically like like the Americans versus the British or something like that, where the cultures drift apart and this antagonism builds up. Like I thought that was super cool and interesting, and like a good use of this near future setting, trying to describe how it happened. And you also end up with this humanity hasn't evolved into new species, but you do have the Belters are affected by growing up in these completely different space environments. Like I thought all of that was super cool, and even if the tech stuff was kind of hand wavy at points to make it work, I thought keeping it in the near enough future that it's recognizable and you can kind of see history progressing maybe a couple of centuries ahead, I thought was really neat and interesting.
I have to agree, insofar that like I'm not sure if it's believable for the reasons you mentioned, Vincent, but it's relatable, and I also kind of buy like it's this one technological advancement with the drive, but then like for example, like Earth had, I think they say like what was it, like 30 billion people living on it or something like that. Just like the amount of resources required to keep them alive, but they just like don't have the money to like spend on developing extra tech. So therefore, like you've got ships like the Canterbury, which are just barely holding it together, using old timey thinking about how spaceships are just to get freaking water back to your planet. Like in a way that seems I don't know if it's believable necessarily, but it's compelling.
On Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk, a lot of times they come up with like the next big business venture is asteroid mining, and like one of the big things is you could drop one of them on the Earth and instantly you have like water to quench everyone's thirst for nearly forever.
Right.
Like just the materials available in space like hard metals would be infinitely easier to get or in more abundance. Like that, people are already talking about that. Like, I'm sure there's crazy, like, there's crazy Elon Musk stories and stuff like that. I'm sure.
We're gonna go mine that car he sent to space.
Yeah.
John, what do you think? What do you think?
Both of you make a pretty convincing point, though. I think Vincent's touching on something that is, I think it's imminently true based on our discussion. Like the technology is not infinitely or so advanced that we really can't even have a discussion about it because it's so advanced. It's sufficiently near to what we already have that we can actually nitpick it because we have some relatable experience to say, oh, that's like really difficult to do. Whereas like in the, some other book might say, well, there's this like FTL drive that uses physics that we're completely, that we really don't have any relation to. We don't have any reference for. So how would we even be able to intelligently discuss it other than to just accept it? And I think that's different about this book in the sense that the technology is so near to us or the technology advancements are so near to us that we can actually have a frame of reference to discuss them. But on the other hand, it's the book is just not about that. It's really, I think they've gone too far in that way. The setting for the book involves a technological universe, which is maybe you could draw a line from our technology today to where that is. But then the relative problems of the planets essentially be like colonialism and the problems and like corporations run amok. These are problems that we're like very familiar with. Like they're very relevant to us.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't want to say about colonialism, but like they're ones that we either have experience with in the past or they are relevant to us now in our daily lives. And I think that is kind of a miss because I found them to be kind of boring. Like it's not actually like that interesting of a setting in general. Maybe again that was another intentional decision by the authors to not draw that much attention to most of the world building, but I didn't feel like it really paved a lot of new ground.
So I brought up this question because I actually felt very strongly that it was a major con to the book. We haven't talked about the characters at all because like we're so hung up about like the nitpicking of the science. Like the book is like spends most of its time about like two characters. One who's highly idealistic, who's the captain of the Rocinante, and the one who's kind of like, the beat weathered cop who's kind of like more practical and more jaded and weathered, I guess, in the world. And like their kind of conflict in terms of how do you handle like assholes in space and like and like COVID in space. Like it's not COVID, but it's like this alien disease that basically turns people into like vomiting zombies in space, right? Like I mean, we'll get to the zombie point, which is kind of crazy, but like I actually feel that this neuroscience thing is actually really distracting like the amount of processing power I have in my own brain to like think about like the major themes in this book, like the ideas of like colonization and like the dynamics between Earth and Mars and the Belters, who are like the people who live on the fringes of the galaxy, and like the rights of all these people. Like there's so much like time spent like, oh my god, like why in the world are they still using nuclear weapons when they have highly efficient super energetic drives which could probably make way bigger bombs than a nuclear device? But everyone's like, oh my god, they use a nuclear missile in space. It's like, I mean, like I get hung up on the idea of like, are you kidding me? They still like nuclear weapons are the best that we have, given that like the US spends like half of its discretionary funding on the military. Like if like the future Earth or the future Mars or even the future Belters spent half of the discretionary money on weapons, and they can like colonize like most of like the galaxy, like most of like the solar system, they would have way bigger bombs at least. Like, they like most of the warfare is like, oh, well, we could destroy Earth if we dropped anvils down a gravity well and the anvil hit Earth. It's like, are you seriously saying that anvils are the future weapons of mass destruction when you have so much technology? Are you kidding me? Like, I mean, that's the reason why I just had that huge, like, I got stuck when I was reading the book. I was so stuck. I was like, are you kidding? The technology's not good enough. Like this far in the future, like you're talking about like biology being like this crazy where like you're genetically engineering people to be more psychopathic, so you have more efficient researchers, right? But you can't even spend any money on like more than 6 ships. Like it's like, oh, defending my super secret base, I have 2 stealth ships. Oh my god, it's like, oh come on, like even Star Wars has like a fleet of 1,000 like TIE fighters. Like you can have something better than that. I don't know. I'll
Interesting.
I thought the anvil thing was like a concession to the fact that, like, given orbital mechanics and relative velocities and all that, like in space, it's pretty easy to wreck stuff because you just have stuff moving relatively fast and hit each other, and then everyone dies.
Yeah, but we have meteors the size of cars that burn up in the atmosphere and like never even touch Earth.
That was the point he was talking. Well, yeah, fine.
Like, how would you destroy like a habitation like on Earth? Like, say you want to destroy Washington D.C. by dropping an anvil from space. Like, wouldn't it burn up in the atmosphere? At least most of it, like to the point where it wouldn't be a nuclear bomb by the time it hit the Earth.
I don't know. Maybe he's saying that the object in question has to be anvil sized. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what the author said. Anvil.
Anvil sized by the time at the time of impact is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, he doesn't go into that level of discussion, though. You're right.
I assume it's the what was that movie where they dropped like giant tungsten rods on London or something, and that was just from orbit. That wasn't even from space or whatever.
Because the movie consulted Neil deGrasse Tyson for that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the thing is, like, and just, I mean, gosh, we're
so over time.
I know we're going over time. I know. But I mean, this is the fun of it, right?
I was going to say, I think it's more just the fact that we're nerds and having fun talking about physics and tech versus like.
God, and I'm so out of my depth. Like, I don't know any of this goddamn tech, and I'm still like rolling my eyes. Like, I'm waiting to get to the biology. I'm waiting to get to the plot. Like, what about the bomb and zombies? We've been talking about the bomb and zombies. It's the main point of the goddamn book.
I know.
Let's talk about it.
Let's do it. So, I mean, actually, just to pump the brakes a little bit. So, let's talk about the theme of the book. Because basically, all the tech, everything we've been talking about, I mean, we're focusing on it because, of course, we have John and Charlie with us, who are more or less experts on this kind of stuff. But
it's not the call like out of your schedule. Like we called you in as experts. Like definitely not tapping the most convenient people we know.
Definitely not.
You're welcome.
But like that, honestly, it's not the focus of the book. Like I think John, you said like that's not what this book is about. It's about unraveling this mystery, and honestly, it's a little like in your face, but I mean that's why we have a detective with us as one of the main characters, right? It's because you're unraveling this mystery of what's going on with the Scopuli and Julie Mao and eventually Eros and whatnot. But just to speed things along a little bit. So I mean there are these, gosh, there's just so many things I want to touch on, but there's these things that are in this book that are kind of like strangely over they're just kind of lame additions that have been done a million times. And those are the kind of like evil corporate people and the zombies that are like straight out of Left 4 Dead where they barf on you. And I think it's this detraction, in my opinion, from the narrative, because like there's such a high level of like compelling, like I've seen the TV show, so I can't totally speak to this, but like seeing like where things were going, like I could see that being a pretty compelling mystery for the entire length of the book. But I mean, then they kind of work in these bits that are kind of like embarrassingly eye-rolly. Just like the guy was like, I'm so evil, I've genetically engineered the good out of me. It's like, okay. I get it.
My eyes are shark eyes. I've replaced them with shark eyes to make myself more evil. Like that literally is like his eyes were like sharks, and his smile never reached his eyes. It's like, yeah, okay, come on, I get it.
Like we get it.
Shark eyes is a metaphor, Vincent.
No,
there's a Dr. Evil aspect to it here.
No, Dr. Evil was like a nice guy. At least when he smiled, he reached his eyes. But like, it's not really your fault because this book is fucking 600 pages long. Like, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and there's a lot of things to roll your eyes about. But in 600 pages, there's a lot of words.
Did anybody feel like this is like a romance novel of sci-fi? Like, it's interesting enough for like a daily episode, like an episodic television show, perhaps with a slight mystery and an interesting sort of like a novel setting, perhaps space. We don't have a lot of crime mysteries on Amazon Prime.
Go watch it now.
and it's not that compelling. It's mostly just like irreverent kind of garbage. Like it didn't. I'm sorry, I did not take a lot of.
No, that's the word I was going to use, but
I
wasn't going to say it.
I don't think it's that much. Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't think it was. I didn't create this book, but on the other hand, of all the things that we've written, I would not have put this on the compendium of like, this is a book for the ages. This is, this is clearly a book that children should be studying in school or something like that. This is no John Carter. This is no. It's not that good. And the fact that there's like how many books in the Expanse series are there? When we first started deciding this book, you're like, okay, 7 books, it's 600 pages. All right, we're really just like typing furiously away at the keyboard here, trying to get Amazon to sell as many books as possible. I just don't think that it's like all quality. Let's put that away.
That's fair.
What do you, Vince? Are you feeling the same?
John, I am 100% behind you. So the thing is, I look at the cover of my book, George R.R. Martin, the New York Times, NPR Books, Wall Street Journal. All these people say it's a New York Times best-selling series. Like, I mean, I had major issues with this book. Like, not because it was like just too long. No, I didn't think it was necessarily too long, but I mean, it's a detective novel, and like, we haven't even gotten to it, but like, I had major issues with the character development, like the aspects of the like the 2 main characters. One who's like a super high, like hyper idealistic character, like who is the captain of the ship, and then like the beaten cop, which I actually thought was much more realistically written. But like, the treatment of this, like, this beaten cop was like, oh, like everyone's just like, oh man, you're a piece of shit, cop. Like, you have no aspirations. Like, you deserve to die of radiation poisoning. Just get off my ship. I'm not gonna give you any more meds and anything. Like, just go die. It's like, oh my god, are you kidding me? Like the characters I had major issues with. The tech was like interesting, and like the thing is, it was very polarizing. Like, I love like the tech of the book, like the idea that like we didn't even talk about it, but like this virus that comes from space is essentially DNA 2.0. It's like your DNA when you're a little baby, it makes you grow 10 fingers and 10 toes, right? And like the virus from space basically overrides that and says, no, you don't need 10 toes. You need like fucking spines coming out of like your out of your back, and you need to grow like extra intestines. Like, it's essentially like instructions that override your DNA and makes you into like a biological machine, essentially. I was like, that's interesting. And the part that I love most about it is that it's hand wavy. You don't need to explain to me that it's like future like alien sci-fi like virus shit. Like, I don't want to know how it works. I just want to know the idea that like, oh, it's DNA 2.0. That's awesome. I don't care how it works. But like, they spent so much time like, oh, like, this is like, we have 2 ships like at this super secret like, place. Like, let's make the most awesome like battle of history. Let's make the Millennium Falcon fight like, Boba Fett's like, like shit. It's like, oh, come on, guys. Like, there's like stuff I love and stuff I hate about this book so much, and like, it's so polarizing. So like, what? There's a lot of garbage.
You know what? All I can say is not everyone can have good taste.
Starburst loves this book. Starburst loves this book. He loves the series.
I love the show too.
I think Starburst is slightly tainted by the fact that he loved the TV series so much.
Yes.
And like, the TV series is different from a book, because in the TV series you can cut out all the stuff that doesn't make sense, like all the eye rolly parts. You can be like as the producers reading, it's like, no, I don't like that part, and let me pull the audience. They didn't like that part either. Let's cut it out of the series. Like, they can go down to the meat and bones of the series, which I think is the best part. But like, there's a lot of eye rolly shit in here that I just can't roll past. Like, my eyes just keep rolling. I'm like, no, fuck, I'm stuck on that point. I'm stuck. I'm on a Windows loading screen. I can't get past for the next 20 minutes.
That's fine.
Our expectations should be lower for television. I mean, frankly, it should be. No, it should be, because like it just is. Our expectations for story, for character, what is believable, what we'll accept in a television show is much less, because we have we're getting so much candy through our eyes. Essentially, we're getting so much like novelty of like things we've never seen before, and special effects and acting, and all of that is like our expectations for plot development and character are just way lower for television. And that's why this story probably works just fine as a television show, but it's not that good when you compare it to another sci-fi book as a book, I think.
Yeah, you lost me when you compared it to John Carter. So I think we're just gonna have to move on.
I mean, John's point. There are people who like Star Trek, so
Yeah.
I kid.
I like Star Trek.
Anyways, what I was going to actually tell you, Stavros, don't let them tell you how to feel.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm glad someone else has good taste on this show. Jesus. All right, let's move on to
my favorite. We're getting to that, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's jump to our because we're like super over time. So let's do our fun contest topic for this episode. We talked about this beforehand, and we're going to talk about the Rocinante, obviously the name of James Holden's ship in this book in this series. The Rocinante, a reference to Don Quixote. I think it's his horse in that novel.
Yeah, and I just realized that Canterbury is also like a major like start of literature.
Fairy tales
novel.
There you go. Yeah.
Reference.
Yeah. So, what better to name a shift after than a random literature reference? But no, we've each selected a alternate name for the Rocinante. So I need you guys to tell me what it is and tell me why it's better than the Rocinante. I will go first. They talk a lot in this novel about like how they steal this torpedo frigate out of the Donager, and I think it's Alex who always goes like, "Nope, we're legitimate salvage." So you know what? Just put it fucking on the nameplate. Our ship is the legitimate salvage, and every time you talk to anyone, you automatically know that this is a legitimate piece of legitimate salvage. And I'll also say that it's even made even better if you watch the show. In the most recent episode, the conclusion for I think it's season 5 is the most recent one. They show the plaque of the Rocinante, and in slightly smaller than lettering than the name of the ship, guess what it fucking says? Legitimate salvage.
Oh God.
Robert's changed it by the TV series. He's conflating the two. He's like,
oh my God.
If there's an error made in the book, the TV series makes up for it. If there's an error in the TV series, I defer to the book.
You know what? Like I said, some people have good taste and some people just don't. Okay. So anyway, John, what is your name?
Okay. First, I want to object to this game entirely and to the whole concept of the Rocinante, because I feel like it was a drop to a classic literature book trying to pathetically give this book some type of like false deeper meaning. And I seriously cannot find it. It was another eye roll moment. It's like it's bullshit. I don't see the connection between Don Quixote and specifically the characters on their ship. Anyway.
Okay.
Hey, I wanted to take this game very seriously. Okay.
Okay.
I want to start now. Okay. My original answer was going to be the Pequod. Okay. Which is the whaling ship.
That's solid.
From Moby Dick. Because the purpose of their mission, of Captain Ahab's mission, was blind revenge. Okay. He was attacked, and he wanted blind revenge for that attack against the white whale. Okay.
Okay.
So like their mission out there, they got like the Cant got destroyed, and they were like blind rage wanted to get revenge, and then they're pretty much driven. There's not really a good reason for them to continue on this voyage other than the whole book, essentially, other than their desire for some type of retribution or revenge or explained meaning. So I felt like that was more appropriate. But then I thought, no, that's me also trying to give too much meaning to this book. And so I revised my answer. Okay. And a more appropriate answer is the Planet Express ship. Okay? That is the most appropriate name for their ship.
So why is that?
In case anybody's not aware, the Planet Express ship is the fictional ship as part of a fictional John Groening. Is it John Groening? Groening. The guy who made The Simpsons.
Groening, yeah.
For
Futurama.
I didn't know that's how you pronounce it. Great. Okay.
So why is that makes more sense? Because you wish it was delivering pizza?
Or like, yeah, they're errand boys mostly through the rest of they don't really have a ton of agency through most of the book. They're sort of thrust upon going from mission to mission. Okay. Ship for hire, full of a bunch of conflicting characters, conflicting personality characters that somehow make it work in the end.
Gotcha. Okay, I can buy that. All right, how about you, Charlie? What is your pitch for the better ship name?
I mean, if we're going with sci-fi references, he would name it the Enterprise or the Falcon because
they're sci-fi ships. Any sci-fi ship is okay.
and it's not better. It's just
oh my god. Is that
the zero thought answer? Sci-fi ship that you know of? Oh, the Millennium Falcon. The
Falcon. Well done.
I respect your choice, Charlie.
Oh my god! All right.
It's like if you want to be equally douchey, it's like why not just go back and name it like the Odysseus or something like that? If it's like ship and
well, for this game you can only give one answer. So what is your answer?
Let's go with the Enterprise because that is that is the purposefully least creative answer I could come up with, and I feel like
I love it. Total props.
Oh boy! All right, Vincent.
It's not better. That is my explanation.
Okay,
great.
It is not.
So I often say that John and I are like kindred spirits in that like we think very similarly. We have very similar sense of humor. I also went with John in terms of a more kind of symbolic kind of name for the ship.
Okay.
So my name for the ship is actually the Oz.
Okay.
And it's a reference to the Wizard of Oz, and it's because in the Wizard of Oz, there are several characters who are searching for something specific. So you have the Tin Woodman who's searching for heart. And in my kind of mind, like there's a discussion where essentially like the mechanic Amos is basically like, I'm an ex-military guy and I'm super jaded, but I follow Jim Holden, the captain, because he's so idealistic. Like I only do what he says because he's my moral compass. I'm essentially looking for a heart. And while there aren't really direct translations of like, the Scarecrow who's looking for a brain or the Cowardly Lion who's looking for courage, like the main character, one of the main characters, Jim Holden, is looking for essentially an idealistic way to kind of live his life and kind of define the way that people live. It's like, you must give trials to people even as bad as Hitler. You must not shoot people without who are unarmed, like things along those lines. Naomi Naginata, who's like the executive officer who's in love with Jin, is looking for love. Like she's looking for heart, essentially. She's kind of like a Scarecrow to me. Alex Kamal, the pilot, is like, he's just kind of along for the ride. He's looking for money. He's like, he's and like there are a bunch of other characters, like, even Miller, who's like the cop, who's kind of looking for just like kind of revenge or justice in some ways. I feel like all the characters on the Oz, is the way I've kind of named the ship, are on a journey to kind of find to improve themselves or look for something in the way that the galaxy is run. Such that they feel, more complete, like they're trying to complete something about themselves. So I gave it the name of the Oz, just because of it addressed more characters in the idea, and also because the Wizard of Oz is actually like this guy who is really not all that. He's like the Wizard of Oz portrays himself as this awesome guy, but he's really just a guy behind a screen, right? And I feel like all these characters are kind of like trying to be heroes in some ways, like, oh, like we're saving the galaxy, like we're doing everything for the just cause, but like deep in their hearts, they're just kind of like doing like their day to day. Like Miller's like, Miller in the very end of the book, he saves all of humanity. Like he convinces the proto molecule alien, who's basically taken over Mao, Juliet Mao, to go destroy Earth. And he everyone's going to portray him as like, oh, the guy who stayed behind on Eros to convince the alien not to destroy Earth but to go to Venus. But in his mind, he's really like, no, fuck that. I just want to commit suicide. I'm tired. Like, Holden, like who I thought as like my last chance to have a family, like, a place to belong, basically said like, oh, you're broken goods. You're a hyena, in his words. And like, I can't trust you around like people I love. And I'd rather kick you off the ship with no like radiation meds, even though I pretty much know that I'm killing you essentially, because you can't afford any of that shit. Like, he's been heavily irradiated along with Jim Holden. And Holden's got like this multi-million-dollar ship, and he's got plenty of meds, and like he's got an automated like dispensary of like doctors kind of treatment. And Holden and Miller's got nothing. He's got fucking shit. Like he's working like a security job, trying to find a job to like guard like a warehouse after he saves essentially like he kills like the Hitler of the world. It's like he kills Hitler, and everyone's like, go back, military veteran, go beg on the streets. Like he's like, I'm dying of Agent Orange. Nah, fuck that. Just go on the streets. You can die like somewhere where we can't see you. Like he's like, I'm just gonna commit suicide in like a noble way. I'm gonna go die like next to this weird person I love, which we didn't address at all, which is really weird in terms of his, like, fascination. This person he's never met in real life. He's like, I'm in love with like like Kim Kardashian because I follow all her feeds. Like, oh, I could sacrifice myself for her, but like whatever. He's also flawed, but like he goes to commit suicide on Eros, and like he ends up becoming a martyr because he does save Earth, but like nobody's going to like address the fact that he is a worn like suicidal beat cop, and like they actually have a discussion about like, are you actually going to tell like everyone that he's a suicidal beat cop? No, we're going to make him a hero. Like it's like he's the Wizard of Oz. Like he's this guy who's supposed to be awesome, but he's like, really, no, I'm just a broken ass dude. Like I just want to go die in peace. So
it's crazy how good that metaphor works. So I really appreciate that.
I had to sell it for you. Like I mean, back to the Enterprise, I had to crank it up.
I was a little worried about Planet Express followed by Enterprise. I was like, ugh, this isn't good. This game isn't good.
You love this book so much. I put in the top for you, even though I actually feel like I dislike the book the most out of all 4 books, definitively along with John. But like,
what a great guy.
I still care about you and your feelings, and I still want to feel like I want you to respect me as a guy who has taste, because I still thought about the book very hard. I have my own opinions. I didn't like the book, but I still cared about the thought book.
Wow, what a great friend.
We all care about this.
Oh boy. God, let's get this game over with and start voting. So to recap on the ship names, so we have my answer, which was the legitimate salvage. We have John's answer, which was the Planet Express ship. There's Charlie's answer, which was the Enterprise. And
which
then
Enterprise?
Yeah.
Guys, you got to say it, Charlie. It could change my vote. Seriously.
Wow. Yeah, which Enterprise are you talking about? I assume Star Trek Enterprise.
Yeah.
I don't watch the Star Trek. I don't know. The Enterprise. Enterprise car rental company. I'll vote for you 100%.
Yeah, Enterprise rental car company.
Oh my God.
The Enterprise. End quote. Because that's how little I know or care, or I go see the movies.
Charlie, okay, jeez. Wow. Followed by Vincent's answer of
very specifically with regards to Star Trek.
All right, I'll go first.
Stavros dies inside.
I'm going with the Oz, obviously, because
it's the most respectful name for a series.
The rest of them are terrible. John, what is your vote?
I will also vote for the Oz. I thought that is poetic. It was good.
Okay, nice. All right, Charlie, you can still vote and have meaning even though your ship answer does not.
Wow, Cyrus, you're belittling people like this. Putting on the hammer. It's like I'm judging you, and you guys are all.
You know what? I have one more drink than usual, and this is what happens. But anyway, Charlie, your answer.
I love this book more than I love you guys.
John's first pick was so perfectly on the nose, as like if you wanted to have a literary reference, but he didn't pick that, so we're going with the Oz because it's the only sincere answer we received, really.
Wow. Okay. Well, Vincent, you're the winner, but
wait, I forgot. We got the legitimate salvage. I'm voting for the legitimate salvage.
Okay. All right. And Vincent, your vote.
And to throw away all the credit I've gotten to Star Wars, I'm going to vote for the Enterprise because to piss Star Wars off a little bit.
My actual thought was, if I were in the future, what would be the future's version of like the start of literature today? And I'm like, no, it'd be like the start of like TV. So that was like my actual thought process, but I just thought it was funnier.
Wait, there's thought process to your answer?
Wow. This episode is just all over the place.
He had to remember the name of the Enterprise. He's like, but I can't remember the letter. Wait, is Enterprise 1? No, it's Enterprise 2. That's the one.
You act like I am aware that these are things.
I hate you guys so much. All right, let's go to the best thing, worst thing segment, our wrap-up segment. Where we talk about the things we liked and the things we didn't like so much. I will go first. There are just so many things we couldn't even talk about. The things I liked, I bought the near future setting. Of course, I don't have the technical knowledge as some of you guys do, so maybe my smooth brain was just like, yeah, this is all like really cool future stuff. So it actually did seem kind of more hard sci-fi to me. Even though maybe you guys brought up a lot of good points, but when I was reading it and even watching the show, it's kind of more. That's kind of something I really appreciated about it. Was it seems like it was kind of more hard sci-fi. Another thing I liked, something we had to skip when we were talking about the book, but I found the two main characters pretty compelling, to be honest. Miller, for the reasons that we talked about, he's kind of like this film noir, washed up cop. And I don't know if you guys remember, there's the part in the book where he realizes that they gave him the case because he's shitty. Do you guys recall that?
Yeah.
And I read that and I was like, oh shit, that's a little too real, but it made me appreciate the character. So I really like that. And then even Holden to a certain extent, I liked that he's like, even though it like kind of is painted, I could see people saying it's a little bit two dimensional, but as far as like moral to a fault, I found that compelling. Like he always wants to do the right thing, even though there's obvious, like there's certain things about him. Like I think he was like crushing on that girl on the Canterbury, and then he kind of immediately pivots to Naomi as soon as exactly for the fucking reason she says, where she's the only woman around. And I was like, oh yes, that is really bad. But I mean, as far as like that character as a, attempting to be moral all the time, almost to a fault, I found that to be compelling. And, because of his crew kind of looks up to him for that reason. I like that a lot. And the other thing I'll just really briefly touch on is the whole protomolecule stuff. Even though it doesn't really get into in this book what the protomolecule is actually up to, it's just kind of this zombie disease. I found like the fact that like what are people going to do once this wild card is brought into this like Earth, Mars, like the kind of strange stereotype choices, like the zombie, like they literally call them zombies on Earth. It's compelling inspiration. Let's move on to John as a guest for this episode, a focused guest. Your best thing works.
Never invited again. Okay, so the best thing I found about the book, I actually liked the unknown alien attack, or if it's even considered an attack. They call it the small planetoid or small moon. Could actually have been a weapon sent from by. Here, you know what? Worst thing about the book ought to be written. Kick-ass space opera. The first to be. That's the quotations from the front and back.
Book I got
written. This is not the way that a novel should be written. This is not like a kick-ass space opera. Like Dune is a kick-ass space opera.
It's not Dune, is your critique.
It's worse than that. Like I don't even think it's the concepts that are explored in the book. The world that they're relaying to me is a regurgitation of the existing world. Not even the existing world. It's just not interesting because it's not innovative. The storyline, the characters, for me, I spent most of the book very disheartened by the fact that they made choices that they felt that the authors made choices that I thought that they could get away with because the book came off as edgy and irreverent, and that would sell well with again, like it has like a romance novel-esque quality to it, where if you hit certain beats, then people will. It plays well on television, I guess. So I didn't think that it was. I was sad. To be honest, I was genuinely sad because I liked the major enemy of the book, or the major plot point of the book, which was this proto element from outer space, and I felt like it was just a letdown.
Here, John. Here.
Part of the book for me.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a legitimate critique. All right, let's go to Charlie. Best thing, worst thing.
I feel like I'm going to repeat Stavros a lot. Like, I actually liked the near future setting. Like, I figured there's got to be some hand waving to get us from where we are now to having explored the solar system. And I thought it was kind of neat limiting to that. So I also like the idea of, there's this kind of extra, alien bioweapon that leads to this kind of body horror, like cosmic body horror type disease type thing. I liked the multiple protagonists that are both like severely flawed, but still pretty compelling in their own way. The only thing is, I feel like it didn't come all the way together. I know as I was reading it, I was maybe like halfway or maybe 2/3 of the way through, and I was like, "Star Wars, this is like easily one of the books that I've kind of enjoyed most reading." Not necessarily reading, but I was like really into it, especially with like the kind of politics of this near future, trying to build it out, explore what that would be like, use kind of history as a model, and realize this near future environment. And then it devolved into this kind of more tropey, as we said, as Star Wars was complaining, like zombie plot type deal.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I almost feel like it would have been better if just the station had gotten infected as all this was going down, and it turned out that, things were working themselves out politically between the planets and the belt. But at the same time, this Eros thing happened. Like, I feel like the things I found most interesting, like that near future setting, were just the author's way of building out this world for what is a more just typical tropey plot. Like, I liked Miller. I thought he was well written, but he is just a noir cop,
right?
And has like literal visions haunting him, like literal ghosts type things haunting him,
right?
And it's like Holden, I thought was maybe a little more interesting, but it is kind of like, oh, let's give him like an obvious moral, like he's got to stand by it this way, but then give him some flaws, like with how he relates to crew and whatnot, and some insecurities. But I found it all interesting to read. It just went from, quote, like one of my easily most like best regarded books to like just a good version, like one of the better versions of what is just like good fun fare that we've read.
Sure. Because
I think probably the things that sum it up the best was I was super into it, but then it gets super Resident Evil-y with just the guy when they meet up with him. He's like, I'm so confident in my evilness, I'm not even afraid of being shot by guns. It
was like almost like a caricature, right?
Oh my, yeah. So he's like a flat caricature, and it's it leads to some interesting character conflict between Miller and Holden and all that sort of thing. But at the same time, and then like towards the end of the book, and maybe this is just me having like read too much of the stuff or watched too much of the stuff, when Miller's on the ship, I'm like, watch this. It's like, I didn't expect it to happen, but kind of as a joke in my head, I'm like, watch this. It's going to be like Julie's is actually in control of the thing, and he's going to talk her down. And then that's literally what happened. I was like, oh. I don't, it just, the fact that that's not like original, that I've seen that enough times, like, I'm not even sure if that's the author's fault or just like my own experience fault, kind of turns it more into just like serial sci-fi fun versus it being, as John put it, the epic sci-fi opera, the way it should be done. I do have to point out, for people complaining like nuclear weapons is as far as we are now, in Dune, far in the future, where they've like completely recreated humanity and everything, nuclear weapons are still like the crazy thing you're not allowed to use.
The guy wrote it in the 70s compared to this fucking novel.
Oh, okay, fine.
All right, let's go to Vincent. Best thing, worst thing.
I got a couple points. Let me pick off John really quick, because I'm going to keep myself to 5 minutes, even though I have literally pages of comments about this book.
Hey, this book was 600 pages. This conversation can be longer than usual.
Thank you, Charlie. I'll take it, even though you're not Star Wars. Star Wars will probably edit me out. Let's do it. So first of all,
no.
In the interview, for instance, Interplanetary Adventure, The Way It Ought to Be Written by George R. R. Martin. That's on the splash cover, right? In an interview, that's not what George R. R. Martin said as his first comment. He said, "This is the best vomit zombie book I've ever written. That I've ever read." That's essentially the same thing as saying, Stavros, you're the best Greek friend I've ever had. You're the only fucking Greek friend I've ever had. The best book that he's ever read that's about vomit zombies is the only book he's ever read about vomit zombies. George R. R. Martin's first comment was not particularly praiseworthy in my mind, though the author said, yeah, I kind of took it as a positive because, I wanted to. And he's like, George R. R. Martin's like BFF. He edits all his shit. He's the assistant George R. R. Martin. George R. R. Martin says, best vomit zombie book I've ever written, I guess. Like, so did that kind of speaks a little bit worlds about like the way it's packaged. Like, I'm sure the Expanse series is great, and they're like stellar reviews for the Expanse series in this book. But like, let me just talk about pros really quickly. So pros, I'm going to say that the setting is good. Like the idea of the protovirus is good. And the reason why I'm going to say this is because we haven't talked about the protovirus at all. It is the main antagonist of the group, the book, next to like Dresden, who's essentially Hitler in this book.
Evil
So
corporate man.
There's
Yeah.
Hitler, evil corporate man, and there's a protovirus who's essentially like this, like, I don't care, I'm just going to mutate humanity kind of thing. We didn't talk about it at all because we're talking about the Coriolis Effect. So, because the Coriolis Effect was definitely the major antagonist next to the protovirus. So we'll talk about it next. But like pro setting, let's just jump into the cons real quick because I don't have much time. So cons, I would say that character development and the protovirus as well. Even though it was my pro, it's also my con. So it's the way, it's not that the protovirus is a con, it's the way that the humanity handled the protovirus, specifically like evil Hitler, essentially. So the protovirus, for instance, was shot 2 billion years ago because it takes a long fucking time for things to go through space, right?
Sure.
So humanity has existed for 200,000 years. So there's no way that the alien species shot the protovirus with the idea that they were going to infect humanity. They were trying to infect, right? And dinosaurs existed 240 million years ago, still way outside the time frame, like order of magnitude less. So Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So this like alien civilization set it like when Earth was half of its current age, sent this goddamn virus over out. And it said specifically in the book that the virus is specifically meant to target single, like very simple organisms like bacteria, single cell organisms, because they didn't expect humanity and all dinosaurs and fucking shit to like exist on Earth.
Right.
So why the fuck would Hitler say, "Hey, I want to test out what this virus does. Let's go to a major human civilization. Let's hire a bunch of like stupid goons to take over a space station with 1.5 million people and infect them when for way less resources, I could just make a vat of fucking bacteria and infect the bacteria. And like, I want to see what this goddamn virus does. Why do I just spend $5 putting a bunch of chicken broth in a big vat? Infect that shit and see what the virus does. No, I'm gonna steal riot gear from all the space stations in like a 5 billion mile radius. I'm gonna steal riot gear, hire really subpar like thugs to take over the station. Not only that, I'm going to turn emergency shelters into radiation cookers. I'm going to literally be Hitler. I'm going to like make shelters like emit radiation. Like, how much work does that take? You got to find like nuclear material. You got to like put it on a fucking timer. You got to irradiate that shit. You got to have incredible security so nobody finds out about it. Radiation is like, don't you have radiation sensors on the goddamn ship because you're in fucking space? Like, oh no, we're gonna smuggle a bunch of uranium around the ship and nobody's gonna know. Like, because like so much harder. Just build a vat of bacteria and figure out what the fuck the virus does. Like, there's so much stupidity around the goddamn virus. So it's like, oh, so what are you gonna do with the virus? Oh man, if I can re-engineer humanity, that'll like lead to like unlimited power. And in the process, I'm just gonna infect all the people I can find. I'm gonna go infect Earth. I'm gonna do a bunch of shit with this virus. Like, are you kidding me? Like put it in a very contained lab and figure out what it does. Don't just like release it. Like they release it into a spaceship, into like a system, like Ceres, and it has a bunch of spaceships. People can fly around. It's like essentially saying like Ebola will solve like all of humans' crimes. I'm going to JFK like International Airport. I'm going to release it there, and let's pray that it doesn't affect all of humanity. Like. Are you kidding? Like, you talk about how viruses spread in like a world where like travel is like, ubiquitous. Like you can get on a plane, like, Ebola, like coronavirus, like all sorts of things can get around the world in like a day. Like, you infect one person airport, it's like in like Hong Kong, like Bangkok, like London, everywhere, like in a day or two, right? Like this corporation's like, we have super brilliant scientists who we've engineered to be extra brilliant. And their best idea is to go to a major hub of commerce and to test what the virus does. We're going to put it in the major hub of commerce full of spaceships where people go fly away the moment they get fucking sick. Like, oh, are you kidding me? Like, you literally released Ebola into your own goddamn backyard. Like Protogen, like that company. And like, who's to say that like Juliet Mao, who got infected in the first place, went 7 days in space from like the middle of space into like a random ass space station, went into a goddamn apartment complex and magically infect everyone in that apartment complex and destroy an entire ecosystem, the entire place. It's like, oh my God, what you did with that virus is so stupid. Like, so like like again, like I'm waxing really crazy about like this about the cons, but like there are so many things about this book where like they did a great job with like the setting, but like it's so unrealistic that you would have a Hitler character, you have the protovirus handled the way it is. It's like strictly for movies, strictly for TV, not for real sci-fi. Like 600 pages, you could be so much more nuanced. Like in a movie, you got an hour. I get it, an hour and a half tops. Maybe if you're Michael Bay, you get 2 hours. Like it's like we got to kill some people, we got some battles, we got to sell some goddamn tickets, right? But in a book that's 600 pages long, come on, put some thought into it, motherfuckers. Like like do something more interesting with like this goddamn protovirus. So I mean, it would I recommend the book? Yes, it's an interesting book. It is provocative, but it's like. It's not fan fiction, but it's a step above. It's like there's so many gaps in the plots. There's so many holes. Like I didn't even get to how Holden's such an asshole. Like let me ask you: if Hitler appeared in front of you and someone shot Hitler, would you say, "Oh my God, you're unhooked. You're crazy. You shot Hitler. How dare you? Hitler deserved a trial. He deserved a chance to like get behind like a jury." It's like no, he got on video saying, "I killed 1.5 million people." And I'm fucking Hitler. I put them in goddamn like radiation chambers. And by the way, you got irradiated by it. Like you were in one of those chambers almost. You almost got nuked. It's like saying, how dare you, like you Jewish survivor, how dare you kill Hitler? Like that's what Holden did to Miller. Miller got irradiated along with Holden. Miller killed fucking Hitler for like trying to talk his way out of it. And because he was politically elected, yeah, guaranteed he was going to get out of that goddamn trial. And he's like, how dare you? My life, like, Holden's like, yeah, I'm irradiated. I can't have kids for the rest of my life. I have to take meds every fucking month to like screen myself for cancer. How dare you kill Hitler? Like, it's like, my God, like, did you seriously do that to Miller? Like, the character development, such a piece of shit. Okay, I'll end it there.
Gosh.
So, Stavros, since Vincent brought up the whole radiation grows the virus thing.
Yes.
It reminded me, does 5G give you the protovirus?
Yes, the answer is yes.
That's what I've heard. Is if you put up those new towers and you have the protomolecule, you're just instantly a vomit zombie. That's what I heard.
Okay,
I'm glad we straightened that out. Okay, well, geez, let's wrap up the episode there since we are quite over time. But yeah, thanks, John, for providing your expert opinions on all the tech aspects of this book. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you for the synopsis too. 600 pages was very difficult to synopsis.
It was definitely a challenge for sure.
Good job, Stavros.
All right. Well, if you, the listener, have feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcoursepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at subplotpodcast. And for next month, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be reading The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu. But I heard that John is planning something a little bit special for that episode. John, do you have any teasers for what we're going to be doing next month?
Oh, yeah. So we're going to be playing a very special game. And you can expect that we are going to show just how difficult it is to figure out plot development and really understand what a book is doing when you're not able to read the whole book. Learn more the next episode.
Now, Charlie already figured out Leviathan Wakes. Juliet Mao was the virus.
It's going to be harder than that. That's going to be harder than that.
Well, if we had a better book, it'd be harder.
Oh boy! Well, for any listeners that are out there, you guys should read the entirety of the book and then watch us.
And watch the series. Actually, Stavros, should they read the book or watch the series?
I think they should do both. But if your time is more limited, you should watch the show.
This book takes 13 hours to read. It's an investment. So watch the series. Is my
watch the series. All right, then. More pretty pictures.
Say goodbye, everybody.
Hello, Charlie.
Goodbye. Farewell.
Goodbye, listeners.
Goodbye. Farewell. I'll meet to say goodbye.